Warm welcome to all of you. Great that we had so much interest in today's events, and really looking forward to telling you about the findings of this really important thematic inspection, which we published on the 21st of October on the experiences of Black and mixed heritage boys in the youth justice system. It's the second of two reports that the probation inspector has done in the past year in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the debate that I think all of us were having last year about Black Lives Matter and the disproportionality in our justice system. The first of those reports was on racial equality in the probation service and was published in March. And many similar themes, I think, in this most recent report on youth justice. This inspection was led by Maria Jerram. Unfortunately, she's not able to be with us today, but Trevor Worsfold has joined us, who was the Deputy Lead Inspector on this thematic. And we're also joined by colleagues from Uservoice, Manisha Sharma and Ronelle Gale. And they will be telling us about the really important work they did as part of this thematic, interviewing a cohort of Black and mixed heritage boys. And we also have Paulette and Morel in the audience, who were a really important part of our inspection team as well, and a very warm welcome to them. Why did we do this inspection? Well, I think, as I say, obviously this was a debate that all of us have been having over the past year, but looking in depth at our own local inspection data, we found firstly that Black and mixed heritage boys were disproportionately overrepresented in the caseloads of the local yachts that we were inspecting. But equally importantly, we found that when we looked at the quality of support and supervision that was being offered to those boys, it was significantly poorer than it was for their white equivalents. And it was for both of those reasons that we felt we needed to do this thematic. Just as a bit of general background context, and I think all of you will know these figures anyway, but they are quite shocking in some ways. First, I think it's important to say that only a very small number of children are involved in the youth justice system at any one time, either white or black. So just to give you an example, Manchester was one of the fieldwork areas that we visited. The total number of Black and mixed heritage boys children in Manchester is about 8,800. The total number of Black and mixed heritage children in the youth justice system in Manchester is only just over 100. So just about 1% of the total population of Black and mixed heritage children in the city of Manchester. But the critical point is, if you dig into that 1%, a disproportionate proportion of them are from a Black or mixed heritage background. So going back to the Manchester example, 20% of 10 to 17-year-olds in Manchester are from a Black or mixed heritage background, but about a third of the children in the youth justice system in Manchester are Black or mixed heritage, and 35% of the custodial population are from that background. And as you'll see from this slide, those figures are repeated if you look at the national picture, and that picture's got worse actually. So over the last 10 years, the proportion of children who have been cautioned or sentenced who are Black or mixed heritage has increased from 10 to 21%. And even more concerningly, 41% of children in youth custody in the year ending March 2020 were Black or mixed heritage. And that proportion has increased very significantly over time, not least because the number of white children going through the system has decreased much quicker than has the proportion of Black children. Next slide, please. Just a bit about our methodology. We conducted this fieldwork in April and June of 2021, and we focused on 9 areas where we knew there was an overrepresentation of Black and mixed heritage boys in the yacht caseloads. We focused on boys rather than girls because of their numbers and because we know that that disproportionality was greatest, but worth flagging that we will obviously keep an eye on Black and mixed heritage girls as well as we do our local inspections, and we're doing an important joint thematic with the prisons inspector at the moment about girls in custody, and we'll be looking at Black and mixed heritage girls as part of that. The 9 fieldwork sites were all across England, and you can see them on the map here. There were 3 in London, 2 in the Northwest, 2 in Yorkshire, plus we looked at Nottingham and Oxfordshire. The inspection team itself was black, white and mixed heritage. And as I said, Uservoice provided 2 interviewers, both of them with lived experience of the criminal justice system, both of them black themselves. We inspected a large number of individual cases, 173 cases of black and mixed heritage boys we looked at. That included 114 court cases and 59 that were out of court disposals. We tried where possible to interview the case managers that had supervised those cases and interviewed nearly 100 of those. We looked at pre-sentence reports as well, and we felt it was also important to look at remand cases, given that we know that black and mixed heritage boys are very overrepresented in the remand population. So we looked at 25 remand cases. We spoke to nearly 40, or Uservoice on our behalf spoke to 40 boys in the 9 local areas. We spoke to some parents. We did some surveys and had 164 yacht staff respond to our survey, as well as 76 volunteers. We held focus groups. And at a national level, we held some meetings with staff in the Home Office, senior leaders in Ofsted, and DFE. We spoke to the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. We spoke to the National Police Use Council and to the YGB. So this was a very extensive study which drew on a very wide range of evidence, which I think makes our findings very robust and reliable. Next slide, please, Ashley. Trevor's going to talk a bit more about our fieldwork findings in more detail, but I wanted to start by saying a bit about the boys themselves whose cases we were inspecting. It was clear from our analysis of the case files that we looked at that this small cohort of black and mixed heritage boys have suffered multiple adverse childhood experiences and trauma, and do have very high levels of often very complex needs, including around their mental health and their educational difficulties. And very importantly, we found that those needs weren't being identified earlier on in their childhood, or if they were being identified, they weren't being acted on or properly addressed until they came into contact with the youth offending team, often many years down the line from when that first need had first expressed itself. And amongst nearly all of the YOSs that we visited, there was a general consensus that had those problems, had those needs been identified earlier in these boys' lives, there could have been a very different outcome for them. Just some examples here on the slide. So if we look just at the 114 court cases we inspected, school exclusion, a huge feature, you probably won't be surprised to hear 60% of those cases, the boys had been permanently excluded from schools. We know from national data that the rate of exclusion for black boys of black Caribbean heritage is over twice that of white children. A third of the cases we looked at, the boys had suffered exploitation, criminal exploitation. Half, where this had been noted, had suffered racial discrimination. That may well be an underestimate. Next slide, Ashley. Continuing the story, this group of boys we found were much more likely to have had well-being or safeguarding concerns. A third subject to child in need or child protection plans. A quarter of them had some form of disability where that had been recorded. And as I said, those very high levels of exclusion. And we found examples of that on our local fieldwork visits as well. In Sheffield, for example, we were told that over half the children in their PRUs were from a black or minority ethnic background. In Nottingham, black and mixed heritage boys, we were told, were twice as likely as their peers to be permanently excluded from school. And those exclusions were heavily concentrated in 3 academy schools. Next slide. So in addition to those case file statistics, we thought it was very important to get behind the statistics to look at the real life stories of those boys, which is why we've engaged with Uservoice. And you'll be hearing more about those stories from Manisha and Ronelle later on. But just some key themes that came through to the inspection team from those accounts, and I flagged them on the slides here, but the boys told us about the very tough and stressful environments they were growing up in. They often came from the poorest areas of our major cities. They were growing up in large estates with little control over the peer groups that they were coming into contact with. One boy in London described his area as being a war zone. All the boys talked about high levels of discrimination and stereotyping. They were often subject to misleading assumptions about their levels of maturities, with the boys themselves recognizing this issue of adultification, that police and professionals often perceived them to be older than they were. Levels of stop and search were commented on pretty much everywhere that we went. A sort of fatalistic assumption that was just part of being young and black in major cities in Britain today, although it's particularly pronounced in London. On the positive side, I guess the boys felt more positive about their relationships with the yacht workers, but said often that the interventions they were undergoing were a bit tick box and weren't really challenging the root causes of their problems. Told us they didn't really understand the point of some of these interventions or get much out of them. And they, without support, I think, struggled to identify what their needs were and how they may be helped. So that gives you a sense of the boys and the cases that we looked at. Should we move on to Trevor now to talk a bit more about the findings?
Thank you. Yes. So if we turn first to look at the findings in relation to governance and leadership, we recognise that addressing disproportionality has been a priority for most youth offending service and an objective in youth justice plans for a number of years.
Trevor,
I've unmuted myself now. Yes. Sorry, there was a bit on the line and I got muted. So I'll start that bit again. We recognise that addressing disproportionality has been a priority for most youth offending services and an objective in youth justice plans for a number of years. However, until recently, there's not been sufficient impetus to improve and deliver high quality services that achieve better outcomes for Black and mixed heritage boys. To reduce the overrepresentation of Black and mixed heritage boys in the criminal justice system, there needs to be a clear understanding of what is driving it in the first place, with a detailed, robust working plan in place to address it. We did not find that this was the case in most areas. A number of services had more recently put action plans in place, but progress is yet to be seen generally in the casework being delivered. We found that most youth offending service managers were strong advocates for Black and mixed heritage boys in the criminal justice system. However, we found that staff did not always raise concerns that they felt that children had been discriminated against, for example, in relation to stop and search activity. An example of this was the case of a boy who'd been stopped and searched 5 times a week. While the case manager thought this was concerning and the child was being targeted, it was not raised with colleagues or with managers. Management oversight in relation to supporting desistance and managing the safety and well-being of Black and mixed heritage boys was sufficient in less than half of the post-court cases and in just over a third of out-of-court cases, and was therefore not driving the required improvement in service delivery. And indeed, when we looked at oversight with a specific focus on diversity, we were just concerned to find that overall it was effective in only 18% of statutory cases and in just 13% of out-of-court disposal cases. So if we move on now to look at our findings in relation to staffing, the amount and quality of training that had been delivered varied across services, and most staff had received unconscious bias training and race equality training. The majority of staff felt that this had prepared them quite well for working with Black and mixed heritage boys. However, Our findings on the quality of casework indicate that more training, supervision and support are all required. Some staff, and this is a finding we also found in the adult inspection, some staff appear to lack confidence in discussing culture and/or experiences of discrimination, which meant that specific challenges faced by Black and mixed heritage boys were not fully explored in their supervision, and they may not be understood or addressed. Only about half the case managers we spoke to felt that the induction process sufficiently covered issues of race and equality. Looking at the staff, in most staff services, there was a lack of Black and mixed heritage volunteers, and some services had struggled to recruit staff and managers that reflect the groups of children, and in particular, there was a lack of Black and mixed heritage male staff and not enough mentors. And this was particularly important given the absence of a suitable male role model was often cited as a challenge for this group of children. Turning to partnerships and services, despite children being overrepresented in the criminal justice system and in the work of the youth offending services, we were found that there are few services commissioned specifically for Black and mixed heritage boys. Good quality specialist commission services were the exception rather than the rule. Where voluntary and third sector organisations were available, they were not known to all staff and volunteers, so were not routinely used. Looking to the wider partnership, which is so critical for the work of youth offending services, there was concern about the use of stop and search and the forceful use of restraint on Black and mixed heritage boys. This was especially true in London. Some of the boys who had moved from London to other parts of the country spoke of the relief they felt at being able to go about their daily activities without being stopped and searched. To address this issue, in Hackney, the Safer Young Hackney Board requested a briefing and update from its police representative on stop and search practice across the borough. This found a number of cases that did not show sufficient grounds for stop and search. The information recorded was lacking in detail, and the process appeared not to be a proportionate response. As a result, there was training for police officers, and the local chief inspector contacted the supervisors of those officers in order to remind them of the expected procedures. We thought this was an example of good practice. In relation to parenting services, we found there was little support in place for the parents of Black and mixed heritage boys. We did not see many examples of culturally competent parenting programs and support in the youth offending services inspected. However, we were impressed with the therapeutic approach being taken in Lewisham with their youth offending service families therapy team, where a team of Black, African and Caribbean therapists, representative of the local Lewisham population, deliver family functional therapy interventions for children in or at risk of entering the criminal justice system. As Justin has commented, we were concerned about the number of boys who were entering the justice system with identified special educational needs. And we were told by health workers and other YOS staff that there was also a significant number of boys who were assessed as previously having unidentified special education needs when they came into the contact with the YOS. The number of children with speech, language and communication needs were also higher. So we've heard about in Sheffield about the number of children who actually we're told that 52% of children in pupil referral units were from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and only 5% successfully reintegrated into mainstream education. There was a need for better exchange of data on the number of children excluded from school and how these transfer through to the YOS, so that there can be a greater focus on addressing this key structural barrier for helping children move away from their offending. Work with children's social care to provide suitable accommodation to support bail applications was highlighted as a challenge across a number of services. Inspectors noted that in 8 of the 25 remand cases which we looked at, that accessing suitable and timely accommodation placements had been an issue. Some children were being remanded in custody where alternatives could have been provided. And we must remember that 60% of children remanded in custody do not go on to receive a custodial sentence. However, in Sheffield, we noted that there were no barriers to children accessing accommodation when it was needed, as effective processes had been established at a strategic level with clear escalation pathways in place if barriers were encountered. Staff told us this worked well in practice. And so now turning to what we found in the cases. There were significant deficits in the quality of casework being delivered to Black and mixed heritage boys in both statutory and out-of-court disposal work. Overall, we found that the quality of assessment and planning to be inadequate in both types of work. In the statutory cases, only 10% of assessments explored the impact of discrimination on the children, which fed through into the plans, where only 24% were judged to take sufficient account of the child's diversity in deciding the services to be delivered. When staff are undertaking assessments, we expect they should be curious about the child's self-identity, and for Black and mixed heritage boys, this includes their ethnicity. From the cases we inspected, we could see that discrimination was a feature in many of the boys' lives. This was affirmed by the boys who spoke with Uservoice and by the staff we spoke with. The direct work delivered to Black and mixed heritage boys was better, but requires improvement. The level of service delivered had not met assessed needs in any of the cases, with some stark shortfalls, including for mental health, substance misuse, self-identity and discrimination. These deficiencies were noted in out-of-court disposals as well as post-court work. So now I think it's time to hear more about the views of the boys, and so I'm going to hand over to Manisha and Ranel from Uservoice, who tell us what they learnt from those boys.
Good afternoon. Uservoice is a nationwide UK charity created and run by people with lived experience of the criminal justice system. We exist to reduce offending by working with the most marginalised people in prisons and on probation. We ensure that they have an opportunity to be heard and to influence change. Today we are here to speak about our report, commissioned by Her Majesty's Inspector of Probation, to assess Black and mixed heritage boys' experiences of youth offending services across England and Wales. We wanted to know the particular difficulties that Black and mixed heritage children experience when supervised by youth offending services. As part of this review, we asked these children about the difficulties they face and if the youth offending services currently provide the support they need. We spoke to 38 children across 9 youth offending institutes. We are proud to enable them to voice their needs, to recognise their worth, and to put forward their own solutions created through experience. Trained peer researchers engage service users in conversation via semi-structured phone interviews and recorded their responses. This took place during lockdown. We believed it was vital that we adopted a conversational interview approach which allowed our staff to discuss complex topics of ethnicity and discrimination with these children. This approach ensured that rich quality data was collected in a method that accommodated the specific needs of the children we engaged with. Through this consultation, we were able to hear directly from Black and mixed heritage boys and present their unfiltered feedback. Of the 38 children we spoke to, 57% were aged 17 to 18, 29% were aged 16, and 12% were aged 12 to 15. 60% were Black heritage, 60% were mixed heritage. Now I will hand over.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I was one of the peer researchers within the inspection. Just want to shed a bit of light on some of the findings of the report. I mean, one of the most common themes that were coming from all the boys were the YOSs having difficulty having those challenging conversations. And what I mean by that is most of the kids attend the YOS services on the understanding that the other option is jail. So they sort of feel forced to attend firstly, and then when they do turn up, there's no explanation of what's expected from them or what type of help and support is open to them or optional for them. So going into one of the more worse cases, so to speak, there's one child that was of a mixed heritage background. I think his father was black, his mother was white, and the conversation that we had was quite disturbing in regards to, he said that obviously he had regular check-ins with his youth offending worker. They were all lasting 10 minutes, basically just checking in on how he's doing and what he's done this week. No conversations of any meaningful substance in regards to helping him get support that he may need, or his environment or his home safety. I mean, this individual was already being targeted by the police. I think Trevor mentioned earlier about a child being stopped 5 times a week. I believe that's the same individual, and he just didn't know what to do or what his options were. I think this is proof that, you know, I think in order to improve the service, we need to measure the success of the child, rather than having a list of activities or interventions for that individual to do. As you can see on the screen now, there's a couple of quotes that actually came from some of the kids that I was able to speak to. I won't bother to read all of them out, but I will focus particularly on the bottom left, where we asked about stop and search. And 2 different children both said, we asked if they speak about it. One said, no, it's not that deep. And the second child said, no, not really, there's no point. And I think what we have to take from that is they're so accustomed to being targeted and discriminated against in their own environment that it's an everyday thing for them. It's not something of the norm. It's not a problem for them. It's the way that they live. It's the environment that they survive in, and no one's shown them that this is not normal behavior. This is not how things should be running. So I think that's the responsibility of the YOSs, to sort of have that discussion of what is happening, what was leading up to your case, what was the circumstances. I mean, what are the issues? I mean, what is your peer support group like? And I think when I say challenging conversations, this is what I mean. These are kids at the end of the day. They need to be challenged. That's how they will know that they need to change their behavior. If we're just sort of having them attend and tick boxes or answer a few questions without doing any real work, they won't know how to progress. So moving on to one of the other quotes, I'm just gonna highlight half of it, where he says, my YOS worker listens to what I have to say, which I respect because it makes our conversations more meaningful. So this is one of the better cases. Again, I'm going to touch on one of the more successful cases where there was a young boy that was living in London, pretty notorious part of London. He said that he felt targeted. Every day he was getting stopped by the police. He knows it because of the colour of his skin. And what his youth offending worker was able to do to him was move him out of the area. And upon doing that, this child was now able to see what options were available to him. He's now studying at college, got a college course that he's interested in, and that's due to that youth worker going above and beyond and tending to that child's needs. I mean, even simple things like the relationship with his family has improved because he's no longer under those constraints and pressure from the police or from his local area and from his peers, because these are all factors that led to him committing an offence. So I think it's important to bear these things in mind. And I'm just going to touch on one more, which is the top right, when he says, it was beneficial to me. We were talking about things that affect me. And I think there needs to be more of that. I mean, if we're trying to help anybody, child or adult, if we're not addressing the issues that affect the individual, what are the possibilities of making any progression successfully there? So I think I'm just going to put a cap on it down. I'll pass it back over.
Thanks very much, Ronelle, and thanks for all of your help with this study. I mean, it was such an important part of what we what we looked at and some of the insights you had, I think, are reflected in the report, and really important ones, particularly your point about challenge. I think you said to us, you know, one of the definitions that the boys you spoke to had of a in their words a good yacht team was that they left them alone, basically. And as you're saying, actually they don't need to be left alone. They need to be challenged and their underlying issues supported and helped with. But Renelle, you'll be available for questions after this presentation. So thanks again for that.
No problem.
I know from the chat line that a number of people have had some problems getting into this session. Many apologies for that. We are recording these presentations, so you'll get a chance to see the whole session after we end today, and we'll circulate a link to that recording as soon as that is available. But apologies again for that. Just so finally, so in view of all of the evidence that we heard, the evidence from the case files, the evidence from Renelle and Uservoice's interviews, the national data that we looked at, the discussions that we had with national stakeholders, on the basis of all of that, we make 18 recommendations in the report for where we feel action needs to be taken, and those recommendations are directed at both national level at the Home Office, the YJB, the Department for Education, but also at a local level to individual police forces, local authorities and youth offending services. And you can read all of those recommendations in the report itself. We do focus quite a bit on data because we feel without data it's not possible to come up with the detailed action plans to deal with disproportionality that we feel are still needed. So there's a key recommendation, for example, that we think that police forces, well, the Home Office and police forces should publish detailed data on stop and search activity broken down not just by ethnicity but by age as well. At the moment it's not possible to find out what proportion of under 18 stop and searches are of black and mixed heritage boys. That's a big gap in the data and it needs to be filled. And local YOSs need access to that data themselves. And when they do get that access, and Trevor mentioned the examples of Hackney, actual things can happen. In Hackney, they found 2/3, I think it was, of stop and searches of black boys under 18 didn't have sufficient grounds for them. We make recommendations to Ofsted and DFE as well. Can we have the next slide, Ashley? Sorry, it's not reflected here, but there's an equal lack of data, we think, or challenge around exclusion. So we make recommendations to DFE and Ofsted that there should be an obligation on local academy chains and local authorities to scrutinise the data on disproportionate rates of exclusion from school within local areas. It's clearly in need of in view of the fact that educational needs were not being picked up earlier in the lives of these children. It's essential that those needs are picked up at the earliest possible point. The recommendations on the screen, as Trevor was saying, we found that in a significant proportion, I think it was about 1/3 of the remand cases we looked at, there wasn't a proper suitable alternative accommodation place, potentially resulting in more children being unnecessarily remanded in custody. So that feels like a gap that needs to be urgently filled. We make recommendations to YOS management boards that they need to have concrete visions and detailed strategies and actions planned around disproportionality, and also about supporting the boys on their own caseloads. And as Trevor's data demonstrates, there is really too much poor quality work going on with these boys, and that needs to be improved with clear targets set for improvement. Last slide, please, Ashley. And finally, for individual yachts managers, and I'm hoping that many of you are on this call, some recommendations for you as well, particularly about your role in management oversight of the cases that we're talking about, being aware of those cases and what the outcomes are for them, and making sure that these boys are receiving the quality support and supervision that they need. And also thinking about this gap in specialist provision that Trevor was flagging. Is there a role for commissioning more local specialist services for this group of boys? Next slide. Alongside this report, as this slide says, is available on our website. Do please have a read of it. Alongside our thematic reports, we also now publish effective practice guides where we find effective practice which we think is worth sharing. Trevor has flagged up some of that in his presentation, but we did feel there were some good things going on in some of the areas that we visited. Tammy, do you want to say a bit about how that's going to work?
Yep. So effective practice we define as where we see our standards delivered well, and it's great that we were able to go back to 5 out of the 9 areas and share some good practice. So Uservoice, and Renelle speaks to us in a video which we'll share about what the boys said. We then go to Haringey and we talk very much about a shared strategic vision that was built from practice up, and some great tips from the head there talking about being bold, be persistent, don't just get the data but connect the dots, understand it. We also look at the disproportionality project that was in Haringey. And then we go to Hackney. Hackney really explains how their board dealt with some feedback from children in Hackney who were saying they were finding stop and searches really oppressive. So the board took the lead with that and did something about it. And we spoke to the manager there who shares what happened. He also shared the fact that Lammy and others have found that Black and mixed heritage boys are often underrepresented in out-of-court disposals, and Hackney found that wasn't the case. So we talked to them about what why they think that might be in Hackney. And then we go to Lewisham, who talk about their anti-racist strategy, which everybody in that office we spoke to were really bought into and had a clear understanding of the vision. And we talked to their family therapy team, who share some great nuggets about how engagement is our responsibility. We shouldn't be saying that these people are hard to engage. We need to look at different ways of engaging them, the importance of family. And they also talked to us about the team around the family and how they engage other systems, which I thought was really interesting. And we touch on commission services by wipers. And then practice-wise, we go to Liverpool and talk to a really culturally competent practitioner. One of my favourite questions she says she asks all her boys is there anything stopping you reaching your full potential? Which I think is a beautiful question to ask these boys. And then finally, we go to Sheffield and we speak to a young Black boy and his practitioner about their relationship and how they've moved forward and made progression. So that will be out in December, and I can see a few people here who've been involved in that, so I know that you'll be pushing it.
Thanks, Tammy. Really look forward to that. So do look out for that. It'll be up on our website as soon as we publish it. Right, I think we're now going to open this up for questions. If you could post your questions in the chat line or raise your hand and we'll come back to you. Before we get into that, it's great that we've got a couple of people helped out with the field work and helped out with the fieldwork interviews. I just wanted to start by asking whether either of them wanted to give some reflections. So Morel or Paulette, did either of you want to say anything? Morel, I can see you on my screen.
Yep, I'm happy to go. So I suppose personally, I was really interested in being part of the thematic inspection, and I joined on a short-term placement. We have a lot of evidence about the disproportionate outcomes for Black and mixed heritage boys. So for me, it was really key to be part of understanding the current landscape across the country, where the good practice was, but more importantly, how we really collectively drive improvements. So my current role is within the HMPPS Race Action Programme. So personally, again, it's about how we align these findings with the work we're doing on a wider scale to really push this agenda and really get improvements system-wide. And equally, the work that I'm doing with partners from a policy perspective, how we influence policy to drive some of these changes as well. So for me, that's key in the work that I'm continuing to do.
Thanks, Morel. Paulette, it's great that you could join us from the Essex Youth Offending Service. Any reflections from you?
Yeah, I think just quickly, for me, as someone in youth offending and being part of this thematic, my reflection, I saw some really good energy out there, from some practitioners. I did also pick up a few fears, anxiety, particularly from non-BME practitioners who just didn't feel that they had the confidence or the strengths to really delve into the diversity issues with children and young people. There was one that really stood out in my mind, talking to a case manager, and this young person actually, she was saying quite confidently that actually I don't feel it's an area that is my forte, that is something that I could broach. But actually, when I'd read the file, this kid was actually arrested en route to a Black Lives Matter event. And I did sort of flag to her and said, well, that was a conversation starter, if ever there was one. And I have to say, it was a bit of an eye-opening moment for that practitioner who kind of went, oh, yeah. So I think there is some bits more for me on reflection as yacht practitioners that's within our gift. But I think I've been thinking about it, and I've looked at it from the 3 E's, if you like, of trauma-informed practice, about events, about experiences, and about the effects, you know, and some of the events like stop and search and all of that, the impact that have for young, you know, it's their everyday experience for a lot of Black and mixed heritage boys. And the effects is that they're getting poorer outcomes. And, you know, I use that analogy because actually it just tells us that it's already within a lot of our gift, within yachts, some of the work we're doing already to really home in on this piece of work and improve the outcome for Black and mixed heritage boy. It was a privilege to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulette. I've got a couple of hands up, and I think some questions in the chat line as well. First, I'll start with the hands that are up. Chris P. I don't know what your surname is, but are you out there, Chris?
Hello.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, how are you? Hi, everybody.
Good, thanks.
Yeah, good. I guess I had a question for yourselves or anyone else that could support me with this. There was 2 things that I heard. One is the term disproportionality. I'm having a hard time with it because to me the term is looking at the obvious. You know, I'm from the States, obviously. I've come here to work in yacht for several years, and I think in I'm from Sutton. In our local authority, we don't have a large number of Black and mixed heritage young people. It's predominantly a white British borough. But when we do get young people who are Black or Asian or mixed heritage, there seems to be a massive focus on them from children's services to everyone else, and I think a lot of it has to do with anxiety. And when the term disproportionality is used, perhaps it's used incorrectly, but we're looking at sort of the things that we know in terms of their ability to sort of navigate post-court, post-custody in society. And what I've been talking about, because I'm quite passionate about this topic, is intersectionality rather than disproportionality, because I feel like there are systems in place that are keeping Black and Asian mixed heritage people from sort of advancing even before they enter the youth offending service. So I'm wondering what work are we doing to address that? Because I have a lot of young people who are unable to enter colleges, find jobs, get on apprenticeships because they've been involved with the youth offending service. And it's a lot more difficult for them because they don't have the resources or the family members or support that may be able to get them a job, perhaps at, you know, their uncle's or grandfather's construction company. You know, they've been told to get a CSCS card and, you know, just look for a job or go to school. So I'm just wondering if there's any work being done to address the intersectionality rather than the disproportionality.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, I think when we use disproportionality in our reports in a sort of statistical sense, in the fact that there's an overrepresentation in percentage terms of Black children. It is Black boys specifically in comparison to what the diversity of the local population for that yacht is. So every time we publish a local yacht inspection report, we give the figures for what's the proportion of Black and Asian children in the population and what is it in the caseload, and we quite often find it's higher in the caseload. I think one of the issues actually is because quite often disproportionality is looked at as given as a group statistic covering all Black, Asian, minority ethnic children. It's actually underrepresenting the disproportionality in relation to Black children and Black boys in particular. And I think one of our recommendations is that you need to look in a much more granular sense at what the disproportionality is for each ethnicity within an area, not just group people together. But I completely agree with you. On top of the disproportionality in the criminal justice system specifically, these children are also experiencing discrimination and real challenges around every other aspect of their lives, including particularly access to education. I've certainly heard stories about FE colleges, like you're saying, being reluctant to take on children who are on a yacht caseload, or people feeling they're being barred from FE colleges. We give examples in the report of Black boys in FE colleges who felt they were the only boy in their class and really felt discriminated against and ended up leaving college because of that. So you're quite right. There's an overlaying level of issues that these boys have if they are to be supported to turn their lives around. I don't know whether, Trevor, you had any thoughts on it.
I just wanted to comment on your point, Chris, about needing to deal with things earlier in the system, and that's one of the key sort of things we're looking at in our report about the work that youth offender management boards could be doing by looking. They're a partnership, so they're working in education, children's services, all those cases where we think that work should be done earlier. And so what we're encouraging the management boards to do is to actually look at what work could be done earlier with those children who are before they ever enter into the criminal justice system. That's part of what the push of our recommendations is about.
Should we take another question? Desmond Brown. I think you're on mute still, Desmond. Do you want to put it in the chat line if you can't get out of mute? Yeah, you might have to put it in the chat line, and we'll try and get you through that. Oliver Foxall.
Hi there. Yeah, my name's Ollie Fox. I'm the head of service, Buckinghamshire YOS. I just wanted to come in on your point there, Chris. I thought it might be helpful if I just kind of talked a little bit about what we do in Buck. So we have high levels of disproportionality in Buckinghamshire, specifically Black and mixed heritage boys, and we've done quite a lot of work on the drivers for that disproportionality, because we recognised that we didn't want to leap to action before we understood what was driving this issue. So unsurprisingly presented a pretty clear picture of disproportionately poor outcomes across a range of areas, so exploitation, social care involvement, exclusion, education, all the kind of things that unfortunately are predictable. So what we actually did was we've put together a project where we work with children who are transitioning from primary to secondary school, so specifically Black and dual heritage boys from year 6 across a pilot number of primary schools in Bucks, and we work with those schools who identify children, not necessarily that they're concerned about in terms of entering the youth justice system, because we didn't want any bias to creep in. We just offered it to children who are Black or dual heritage, and it's all because of obviously we're talking about quite young kids, so it's not typical yacht work. The focus is on it's positive stuff about achieving potential and all that kind of stuff. And we commissioned a coordinator to deliver it through the volunteers to deliver the work. And that's worked really well. So that's now in year 2. So we work with Spark to Life, who are an organisation who primarily work in London boroughs, who've come out to deliver that with us in Bucks, and they've really kind of guided us on that journey. So it's been a really kind of positive experience for us. So if you wanted to get in touch outside of this, I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more about how we kind of got that off the ground.
Sure, no,
helpful.
definitely. That sounds right up my street, to be honest. And because I do think it's an issue. I don't know. We want to be as preventive as possible. I love the fact that we are approaching this from a proactive. I love the fact that you're looking at it from that age group, because we often get young people who are 15, 16, and I'll never say it's too late because I'm quite optimistic. But for some people that age, it's just difficult to even know what the trajectory is if they're not resilient enough to get through some of these other factors. So no, absolutely.
Thanks for that, Ollie. A question from Xanthi: of the 25 remanded Black and mixed heritage boys in the sample, what were the outcomes for them? Did this mirror the national figure? Do we know that, Trevor?
I don't know it offhand, but I can certainly look into it and get back to Xanthi.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. Desmond, give it another go.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
My chat's not working, so apologies for forcing my way in. I'm from Bristol. I've actually just finished a report into Avon and Somerset's criminal justice system here that will be published in December as well. And part of that was the youth justice system. And I think, just following on from some of the conversations, what we found in our area was that at local level, at the top tables, there's a lot of talk about disproportionality and the willingness to do this. When we get to local levels and the school to prison pipeline, there is, and I'll say it bluntly, there is not an understanding of disproportionality. I think that it's not been driven locally. There are issues around, as you said, exclusions, but even in some cases, ethnicity data isn't being collected, and it's being collected at a BME versus white category, which obviously then has its own issues. We're obviously using the RII that David Lammy wants to use, and our ambition is to get it to at least 18+1 category. But we've had to, in our report, go back to the very basic 5+1 because it's not being collected. And the issues, as I said, even at local level, there is not an understanding by local teams on disproportionality, what it actually means and what data they're collecting. It seems to be a mishmash. And again, at the highest table, and in reports and we see that there is a willingness to do this, but and this is across the criminal justice system with the police. A lot of high-level discussions, but when we get down to the bottom level, no one is driving this work, and that's an issue. In my local area, we are still pushing for a year to find out the exclusion rates. I know what they are because it's been presented to me, but we've not been shared, and it seems to be hidden. And we know what it looks like because it's been for 40 years. We've had the same conversation. So. Again, there is lots of good work, and I'm not a harbinger of doom. But at the same time, I think 40 years in, I'm 51. I'm a dual heritage person. It is frustrating. I work with young people excluded, involved in serious youth violence and child exploitation in my day job. And a lot of the comments that we've had have mirrored. What Chris was saying about 15-year-old boys who have actually given up on the system. They don't want to be involved. They see all services as a problem. We've got some very articulate young people in care system who are part of that, who are dangled as bait to catch exploiters and then into the criminal justice system themselves, and aren't protected, aren't advocated for. So, I think there is a lot of good work going on, but, we've had a lot of time to be dealing with this, and I'm not to throw it under the bus, but more action is needed, and it's needed now. And I think the biggest issue is the top tables are talking about this and sending it down, but where is the accountability at local level? And that's what I'm very passionate and very upset about, because it doesn't seem to be a priority at local levels, that we are seeing any kind of accountability or resolving of this issue. And yes, I'm going to stop there because I can go on.
Thanks, Desmond. I mean, really powerful. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think Bristol wasn't one of our fieldwork sites, but the sorts of things you're talking about we found in so many other yacht areas. as well. Like you're saying, it's sort of on the agenda for the senior boards, but what are they actually doing about it? What data they're using? Who's being held accountable? Exactly as you're saying, are all the things that are missing and need to be urgently.
And sorry, can I just jump in? Also, the use of the disproportionality toolkit. I mean, you know, the evaluation that David Lammy asked for in 2017, there are areas that are still, you know, 5 years on that don't understand how to use the disproportionality toolkit, which is one of the benefits of the work that's been done. But where is that drive on the ground that people actually are using it? Because they come back and say, oh, well, we don't understand it. We don't know what's going, you know, it's not good enough. Sorry.
Thank you for that. I think we had a question from David. David Ijoa, I hope I've said your surname right. Of the 18 recommendations in the report, if you were pushed to pick 5 to drive forward as soon as possible, which of the 5 would you suggest? I'm happy to have a go at that, but Trevor, do you want to have a bash at it as well?
Yes. I think the critical bit for me is around what the work of the YOS partnership boards. I think they could have significant impact on, because a lot of these things happen locally. I think that probably the most important one for me would be to actually be clear there wasn't not just a vision, as we've said, for improving outcomes, but actually a clear action plan which actually targets for improvements in terms of it's obviously got to cover the relevant factors, but I really do see the management boards as actually being really key on taking this work forward.
Thanks, Trevor. I mean, I would put, if you want action in the short term, I would put a lot of emphasis on transparency of data. Desmond was making the point about you know, they're just, people aren't accessing or publishing the data that's needed. You need it more granular. It shouldn't be taking a year to get hold of local school exclusions data. That should be out there for everyone to look at. The same in terms of stop and search data as well. I don't know, Paulette or Morel, did you have thoughts on this?
Not anything additional that's already been said.
Okay. Renelle, what do you think would make the biggest difference?
The biggest difference, I suppose, to not mirror what Desmond said, but I think we have to keep the children at the focus. I suppose like there's some good ideas that have come about, but there's no follow through. So I suppose it's just about making sure we're making progress, because again, it does seem like a endless cycle. And I know I did mention before that some of the issues that I was finding out from the kids were the sort of the same things that I was experiencing at that same age as a teenager. You know, with a group of peers, you get targeted by the police in a certain area of London. And as much as we're trying to move away from that, I mean, it is what it is, unfortunately. So I understand their frustrations with actually engaging with services in the system, because to them it's all the same thing. It's all one, it's all part of one, and it doesn't improve in one sector without efforts being made in the other part. So what I'm saying there is, us having this conversation is good, but it needs to be supported from the police also, because they have a part to play in this cycle. And it also needs to be looked at by the other services that are supporting the kids. They need to change their approach also. It can't just be one part of the system changing. It all needs to change at the same time in order to have the impact that we desire.
Yeah, and that's why these boards are so important for management boards for YOSs, because they have the right people on them. They've got children's services, they've got the police, they've got health, they've got probation. You know, and as senior people on these boards, they could make a difference if they made the commitment locally, I think. Morel, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I thought your question was in relation to the other point that was made, not overall. But I do agree with all the points that have been made. I think strategically, there is a lot that needs to be done, but also consideration for the support that's provided to staff that are actually working with the children. So a lot of what we saw was confidence of those staff actually having the conversations with children, but understanding what it means to them to be Black and mixed heritage. What does that actually mean day to day, and what support can they effectively provide to those children and their families? And I think that needs to be better understood. because we're expecting staff to be able to have the skills to support the children and make a difference, and not all have. And there's a responsibility for management and boards to make sure that happens. But also around advocating for children, what staff can actually do, and do they have support of their managers when they're advocating for children, and what is normal and what isn't. And a lot of it, what we saw, is normalised. So the example that you gave around stop and search, people aren't challenging that because they just see that as normal. And it isn't normal. So we need to be making sure that we educate staff to understand this is not normal, and these are the steps you can take to challenge it. And we need to be seeing more challenge in the system as well.
Thanks, Mara. I'm conscious that well, one more question, Graham, and then we'll call a stop to it. But yeah, Graham, last question.
Hello, thanks, Justin. It's about the recommendations at national level, and in light of the previous conversation, whether we should strengthen the recommendation to YJB about the role of governing of boards to strengthen their resolve and the practice in dealing with some of these issues, including the reference to the toolkit, which is deeply depressing that that's still being recommended and not taken up. But will you get a formal response from Home Office, DFE, and others to your recommendations? And if so, does that get published, Justin, so we know what national government view is of these? Because your recommendations there are really helpful, and it'd be really nice to know whether they're going to get a formal response. Thank you.
Helen, are you able to help with that one?
Yeah, thank you, Graham, and I agree. So, Justin, I think we're going to approach the YJB to see if they can help coordinate an action plan, which is something that they've done for us a few years ago. We're also going to have a roundtable event, and looking at the recommendations, we're going to invite key senior people who can speak to the recommendations from the organisations, from DFE, from Home Office, from YJB. So that we can hear from them, and Justin will chair that, and we can hear what they're going to do about the recommendations. And then if alongside the YJB can coordinate a response to be able to update as progress is made, that would be ideal. As an inspectorate, of course, we always have options of re-inspecting. But those essentially are the options at our disposal at the moment. So we will be approaching YJB to see if they can help coordinate this.
Thanks, Helen. I've got introductory meetings with new Ministry of Justice ministers in the next couple of weeks with Victoria Atkins and with Kit Malthouse, so I'll certainly put this on the agenda for them as well. I'm afraid we've probably run out of time, but I did want to just end by saying a massive thank you to all of today's speakers, to Renelle and Manisha from Uservoice, to Trevor. Thank you, Trevor, for your contribution, to Tammy. Thanks for flagging what's to come with the Effective Practice Guide. It was great to see Paulette and Morel as well. And a big thanks to Aisling Sweeney for putting this event together and for organising all of the logistics. Apologise to those of you who found it difficult to get into the today's event. As I say, there will be a recording of both the presentations and the Q&A session available after. If you missed out on some of the early presentations, do have a look at that, and do have a look at the report itself, which is on our website, and spread the word about it as well. I hope you've all found that a useful session. I really enjoyed it. Great questions and comments afterwards as well. And do look out for future events. We have one of these events for all of our thematic reports. So I think the next one, Helen, is mental health. Is that right? Is our next?
It is.
Yeah. So we'll be doing a lot. That one. Yeah, really important joint thematic we've done with all of the other criminal justice inspectorates on people with a mental illness going through the criminal justice system, and the challenges they experience and the support that they're getting offered. So look out for our launch event for that, probably by the end of November, I think. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.